You're watching Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. I'm Woo Young. As the United States wraps up its midterm elections, the world is watching. The more than 100 million American voters certainly count in the shaping of the country's foreign policy, from the North Korean nuclear threat and the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine to global trade and climate change initiatives. We focus today on the security issues dwelling on the minds of US allies and how they will be impacted by the course of American democracy. For this, we're honoured to be joined by Ambassador Arirang, who is the chair professor of Kyungnam University and former South Korean ambassador to the United States. It's lovely to see you again, Ambassador. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, Young, it is always such a pleasure to see you. I'm excited about your invitation.
We're very excited, and well, what an exciting night for the US and early morning here in Korea. As the world is watching, we can't help but think about how this is going to impact the rest of the world. And when we look back at the last 2 years of the Biden presidency, some of our European friends, they've been disappointed by America's withdrawal from Afghanistan, as we remember from last year, and what seems to be the American public's waning interest in global affairs, including the Ukraine war. And over here, US allies in the Indo-Pacific are also concerned about the security situation in the region. And as we see these US politicians and the American public becoming more and more polarized by the day, and with even some denying election results, as you must have seen, do you think this raises concern among allies about America's capacity and commitment to global governance in the long run?
You just talked about Afghanistan and Ukraine and Indo-Pacific. And then as a matter of fact, they are the areas where something called rule-based international order is being rather seriously challenged. That is what is happening in large parts of the world today. So this, in fact, is the time when we need stronger leadership to come from the United States. And then for the United States to play that role, then of course it will be absolutely necessary for the United States to put its own house in order. But you just told me about your concern about quality of democracy in the United States today, and then you are not alone in having that kind of concern. So there is this question of populism, racism, acrimony, and disinformation, the worst elements of democracy. In fact, that is what US democracy is suffering from today. So I raised that issue with many of my friends in the United States as well. And then what many of them tell me is this, which is that democracy, even American democracy, is work in progress. Sometimes it works well, but sometimes it doesn't. Maybe this is the time it doesn't work, but at the same time, they in fact assure me that it doesn't determine how it will work in the days to come. So often these days I often tell myself about what Winston Churchill used to say about democracy, and then what he used to say was that democracy may not be the best form of government, but at the same time it is something far better than anything else. So I think this will be the time. All of us are just crossing our finger crossed that US democracy, in fact, would get back in form.
Well, crossing our fingers indeed, and we've got the 2024 US presidential elections coming up as well. And then, Ambassador, I have to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about the possible return of former President Donald Trump?
2024, it is still 2 years away. So I think it will be a little bit too early for us to get into the game of, the chance of 1 to 10. But at the same time, talking about presidential election 2024, most probably the challenges we are facing around the world, the challenges to something I described as rule-based international order, very possibly it in fact would continue until that time. So I very much hope that the president who would be elected in 2024 will be somebody who understands the importance of US leadership and somebody who understands the importance of the alliance. And that in fact would be the wish of not only me, but large number of people in the allied countries of the United States.
We've heard quite a bit about multilateralism in the world, and it seems that America, China, they have their own ideas of what a multipolar world looks like, and it looks like they're building their own sort of security, economic, and even infrastructural frameworks. And while the traditional ones we had, institutions like WTO, UN Security Council, WHO, they're being criticized as quite ineffective by casual observers. And, well, Ambassador, how do you define multilateralism? And do you think countries that were considered middle powers, the ones stuck in the middle, like South Korea, Germany, maybe India, the UK, do you think we can collaborate to protect public goods and really preserve the liberal world order?
So one of your questions was definition of multilateralism, and then the way I define it would be this, which is the multilateralism in my mind is democracy being implemented at the international level. So because I support democracy, I support multilateralism as well. There is a very impressive anecdote which I always remind myself of with respect to how multilateralism in fact was strengthened after World War II. And then there is a story, there is an anecdote about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So Japan, Imperial Japan, in fact attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And United States was in fact engaged into the Pacific War and declared war against Imperial Japan. On the same day, in the evening, President Roosevelt spoke to the American public through a program called Fireside Chat. In that speech to the American people, President Roosevelt said, "We will win the war, and we will win the peace that comes after that." When I first read it, I was so much shocked about that two-sentence statement. First sentence, that in fact is something which any president would have said. The United States was entering into the war, so he said, "We will win the war." But what about the second sentence? That is something which, in fact, we'll be rarely expecting the president say on the first day of being engaged in the war. Well, he didn't know how long it was going to take. In fact, it took no less than 4 years, more than 4 years. And then he said, "We will win the war, but at the same time, we will win the peace that comes after that." That was December 1941. It was not just empty talk. As a matter of fact, it was beginning from back in 1939 that he had his own advisors to work on the basic elements of United Nations, IMF, and World Bank, and International Trade Organization. That, in fact, tells a lot about the kind of vision that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had as a leader of the United States at the time. So we have to remember that the peace and stability we enjoyed over the past 70 years, we, I think, owe a lot to the multilateral institutions which have been developed on that basis. When I say that basis, that is, again, rule-based international order. That is liberal democracy, market economy, human rights, rule of law. So that, in fact, is something which I think we must continue to develop and maintain. And part of your question was if middle powers have a great role to play. My answer would be yes. The reason being, of course, the middle power, quote unquote middle powers, of course, they in fact are in a far more solid and comfortable situation to make a contribution to maintaining the rule-based international order in comparison with what we were like immediately after World War II. So I support multilateralism, and I support greater role for Korea to play in the days to come.
I see. And Ambassador, well, on security, there's still some concern in this part of the world, in Europe as well, over whether US allies can really rely on extended deterrence alone, given the rapid pace of advancements the North Koreans, Chinese and Russians are seeing in their new weapon systems. And there's talk nowadays of Seoul and perhaps even Tokyo having options to attain or develop nuclear capabilities. And now we're hearing about integrated deterrence. So in your view, what should be the way to move forward?
Well, I'm also concerned a lot about what is happening, especially in Northeast Asia. and then we should be prepared sufficiently. But at the same time, I think we should, in fact, watch out so that we will not be overreacting. And when I say overreacting, that will be something you just mentioned, which is that Korea, both in Korea and in Japan, there are increasing number of people who are suggesting we must develop our own nuclear program. That, I think, is an overreaction. I think what we have for the time being, we have something called 3 pillars. First pillar being diplomacy, second pillar being sanction, third pillar being, say deterrence. These are 3 pillars, and I think it will be based upon these 3 pillars that we can effectively deal with the challenges, security challenges coming from all those sources. So when I say diplomacy, at the end of the day, however slim the chance may be, it will be only through diplomacy that we could be reaching the goal of denuclearization of North Korea. But at the same time, as we in fact have been observing for a long, long time, in a sense for more than 30 years, then North Korea, in fact, is not serious about denuclearization. That, in fact, is the reason why we have sanctioned today, and we have to continue to strengthen the sanction regime in the days to come. But for the time being, I think what is most important is deterrence. And then you just used the expression of extended deterrence and integrated deterrence. And talking about deterrence, recently, Defense Minister Lee has been to Washington, D.C. for the annual SCM meeting, Security Consultative Meeting. And then in the meeting with his U.S. counterpart, they agreed upon something very important. First, they agreed upon enhanced exchange of information on nuclear assets. That, in fact, is a very important agreement. The reason being, I have been in this business for a long, long time. So I know how reluctant U.S. officials are in sharing information related with nuclear assets, which is understandable. But at the same time, the agreement has been made to have enhanced exchange of nuclear-related information. Second agreement was they agreed upon joint planning with respect to all different scenarios of North Korean, say, provocations. And that, in fact, is very important. Why? Because at the end of the day, who has the final say on the use of nuclear weapons? That is President of the United States. But what we agreed upon between Korea and United States this time is joint planning. So we have a say in how we should be responding to North Korean nuclear provocation. Third agreement was to have something called annual exercise on nuclear response. That again is something new. So these are very important agreements. And then I'm extremely encouraged about the agreement we have made. For a long time, I have suggested United States must provide NATO-style nuclear planning to South Korea. I believe in that. And then as a matter of fact, what I've just explained to you, that is to say enhanced information exchange and joint planning and joint exercise, they in fact are important elements of NATO-style nuclear planning. So I think in a sense, our two countries, Korea and the United States, we have made a very important step towards the United States providing NATO-style nuclear planning to South Korea.
I see, and certainly Seoul and Washington, as you said, have been really expressing their commitment to really ramping up that defense alliance. And Ambassador, well, you must have seen the United States' latest national defense strategy, and the US has, made it quite clear that Russia is a short-term but acute problem, while China is more of a long-term challenge. But when it comes to North Korea, though, it seems that Washington hasn't had much time for it, particularly at the moment. And, well, to be fair, North Korea, on its part, it's rejected repeated invitations from both Seoul and Washington to have talks. So are you concerned about this absence of diplomacy that we're seeing?
I am. As I already told you, our policy toward North Korea, it must be based upon those three pillars. And then the first pillar, as I told you, is diplomacy. And let us just think about the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War period. And then let us just think about how the relations were managed, especially when it was very difficult between United States and the Soviet Union. One good example would be the Cuban Missile Crisis. Even during that time, even during the time of Cuban Missile Crisis, there was, active channel of communication between United States and the Soviet Union. And it is through, utilizing those channels of communication that the two countries, United States and the Soviet Union, could in fact maintain peace and stability. So that explains a lot about the lessons we should be learning from the Cold War period. And then as we apply that lesson to the Korean Peninsula, I very much hope that North Korea would be responding positively to repeated offers we make. When I say we, both Korea and United States make, to establishing dialogue, channel of dialogue with North Korea. So President Yoon Suk-yeol, who came up with the audacious package, and so far there has been no positive response coming from North Korea. But at the same time, I very much hope that we will continue, South Korean government will continue to make our, plan visibly clear to North Korea that we in fact wish to continue to maintain this channel of communication with North Korea.
I see, and in terms of moving forward, we're confident that our policymakers and the current officials in charge will have you to take advice from and really heed from. So we thank you always for your service, Ambassador. And this is where we'll have to wrap up our interview today, I'm afraid. That was Ambassador An Ho-young, who is the chair professor at Kyungnam University and served as ambassador to the United States for South Korea. Thank you again. It's a wonderful honor to have you join us today.
Thank you, Soo-young. See you again.
Thank you. Thank you to our viewers as well. Global Insight will be back on Arirang at the same time tomorrow here in South Korea. Do join us then. Wherever you are in the world, have a great day or evening. Thank you.